Today's episode of the Rough Drafts podcast is brought to you by Unikrn.com, the world's premier esports betting site. Their esports book covers all of your favorite titles, including League of Legends. Bet for free with Unicoins, which you can use to enter raffles for gaming prizes, and even earn Unicoins just by playing your favorite games. Some regions can even place real money bets. And while you're there, be sure to check out the esports news page where you can read great articles from their writing staff, including me, your host Chase RedShirtKing Wassenar. It's time to put your esports expertise to the test. Log on today. Hello Internet, this is Chase RedShirtKing Wassenar and welcome to a very special edition of the Rough Drafts podcast. The off-season is here. We have wrapped up the finals. If you didn't hear my RedShirtKing Manifesto episode on that, totally should. I thought it was a very interesting series, one that we're going to be thinking about for a while. I think there's a lot more depth to it than maybe the 3-0 would indicate. But you know what? That's not why we're here, because now we're in off-season territory, guys, and that means that we need to start thinking about the most interesting part of this offseason to me, and I think to the lovely guest that we have on today, which is going to be this new North American franchising system and all of the implications that brings. So I have assembled a panel of people that are going to be sharing their thoughts and feelings with you today. First up is going to be a guy you've listened to on the pod before, talking about NA things with me, Matt SuperbianMG. Matt, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm living the dream.
Perfect. Then we got second up, Rylea Arbitrarium Anderson. She's a League streamer that you've probably seen me retweet her links before. Rylea, how are you doing?
Hi, I like video games.
That's good. It'd be a weird podcast if you didn't, so I'm glad we're on board. And then last up, of course, my friend from a while back and a streamer that you guys should all definitely be checking out as well, Xander Orzaidus Raff. Xander, how are you, my man?
I am fantastic, and as I would remind you, as we said back then, let's do some work here.
Yeah, let's do it, fam. Let's just jump right into it. So we have to start with what we know. And what we know are ESPN reports that have come out over the last month and a half or so, conveniently timed while the World Championship was going on. Wonder why. But regardless, we do seem to have a good idea now, pretty solid, of who these 10 teams are going to be. The 6 returning teams, TSM, CLG, Cloud9, Team Liquid, I don't think any of those are surprises. Couple interesting choices were Echo Fox and FlyQuest, who both managed to keep their spots. That means, if you haven't heard your team yet, I have bad news for you. Immortals, Dignitas, Phoenix One, and Envious have not been accepted into this new franchise model, and instead they have been replaced with Optic, who you might know from the Call of Duty scene, a lot of different shooter games they're heavily involved in, and 3 NBA franchises, and Golden State, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Houston Rockets. So Matt, I'm going to start with you. What were your first thoughts when you saw these news articles start to come out in terms of where this franchising system seems to be going?
Well, I think the first thing was when Dig was announced, I think that was like the slap in the face to everyone, be like, hey guys, no one is safe. So, because Dig has been in the NA LCS pretty much since the beginning. And the moment that happened, I think you and I were having a bit of a discussion where we were just like, how many teams do we think are safe versus not safe? And we started like, I think like 8 teams are safe. And over the next course of a few days, we're like, or 7 or 6? Because it just became more and more clear that Riot was looking for something that we did not expect. What they were prioritizing was a lot different from what people expected. I think a lot of people expected Riot to play it safe, value organizations that they've had previous relationships with before, organizations that might have been stable, at least organizationally, even if the teams weren't necessarily good. You know, like Dig was a team that was around for a long time, but they I think there was like 3 weeks where they went like 7-0, and everyone's like, wow, is they going to be good? And then, second half the split happened and they weren't. But I think it was a clear indication halfway through that we're just like, all right, so every team is fair game. We don't know who's going to make it. And at that point, it became clear to me that I thought IMT was actually safe. I think FlyQuest making in was the shocker, right?
Yeah.
FlyQuest making in was the shocker. I actually thought Liquid was of the what I would consider like the pillars of the league. I thought Liquid was the team that was going to be on the thinnest ice.
Well, luckily for them, they got that sweet Disney money, and that makes things a lot easier to work out, especially when we remember that starting in 2018, Riot's going to be doing a lot with the BAMTech streaming service, which is run by, who knew, Disney. No conflict of interest there whatsoever. It's going to be great. Let's move to you, Riley. What were your thoughts as someone who goes to the LCS on a pretty regular basis and maybe sees these faces and teams a little bit more up close and personal than some of our listeners would?
Definitely, I was surprised by IMT. Not only because they're established and how well they did this year, but because Noah is among one of the more actively involved. That's not fair. He actively cares about his players and has programs and people in place to support. His support staff is amazing. I've had the good fortune to meet them in person and talk with them, and they were awesome. And I feel like because of the infrastructure that he laid down for his players, that Riot, who supposedly really cares about player support, would have accepted that and been excited about it. And instead, it seems like there were some politics that got involved that prevented them from allowing IMT to stick around. And when compared to the players that they replaced these teams with, I think, even more surprised that IMT was not selected to stay.
Yeah, I think that is very fair. When we saw the couple names coming in, as an Immortals fan, I had hope. I thought we were safe. Xander, I was not safe. Were you as shocked by that as the rest of us were, or were you maybe seeing this coming?
I gotta be honest, I don't feel like I was as surprised as y'all maybe were. Just because I've been following this a little more from the money standpoint and watching a lot of the investments that were coming in over the last few months. Just seeing what teams they were go to and how Riot has regularly spoken about the length that they've taken to get their sponsorships and how it had to be a very value-oriented thing. And when you started seeing some of the money coming into teams like Envious, for example, their $35 million or so investment from an oil magnate, and Riot is looking for something more related to the sports scene, at least I felt. So I think Immortals was still definitely a surprise overall, but to see why they maybe got rid of Dig and Envy with some of where their investors were, I could understand. Yeah, and actually I thought FlyQuest was less surprising just because I feel like with all the teams they were getting rid of, they had to keep the one team that kind of made it there and has also been there because they were all Cloud9 guys formerly. So I felt like that was a one that they just didn't want a chance touching without enormous community backlash.
Well, and I'm glad...
Enormous community backlash, are you kidding?
Well,
IMT was like the furthest going... Yeah.
Yeah, no, I want to touch on that. I'm going to send this to you, Riley, because I can tell you have thoughts on it. But I think that you've segued perfectly into this conversation of what was Riot looking for? Because you talked about, the investors that they, maybe that was a problem with Immortals. Immortals certainly had a lot of money behind it, whether that was the quote unquote right money or not is a very interesting conversation. So I want to talk to you, Riley. Like when you think about the arguments that have been put forward and the teams that they have or have not taken in, what do you think Riot was looking for, and why does that line of logic that maybe Xander was putting forth not line up so well with you?
So to start with, all of the teams that were dismissed from, well, I don't know that much about P1, I guess, but the other three have a very strong video game esports following from other games. And so from that perspective, I felt like Riot was sort of saying words that we're not allowed to say on podcasts to these teams and how important it was to them that other esports are following them. And I thought where in the past that has been an asset to Riot, right? Because they were the small fry. And so an asset that Riot would be considered as important enough to these video game moguls that they would allow other people to come in and bring their CSGO following and bring their HOTS following and bring their COD following. And now they're just kind of saying, yeah, nobody, we don't care. Like, we're the only one that matters. And so I feel like, especially I was, maybe we've had conversations, you and I, about Dig, and obviously I was pretty upset about that one too. But Envy, I was surprised by, because they are also well run, have a huge video game following in multiple esports, and had extremely good funding. They also, I don't know, they were kind of the one everyone sort of loved, even though we didn't expect them to get that far, and they got a lot further, I think, than fans thought they would. But I felt like what Riot was looking for here was not at all what the community expected from them. Like, they thought, oh, we care about them, these are our people, they're going to keep them. And Riot seemed to be looking for the prestige that was coming from traditional sports in ways that other recent esports leagues have also done. Mm-hmm. And I think that's maybe their intention was to move into a more mainstream place, like regular, I guess, traditional sports have done, and that's why they let Golden State, Cavs, and Rockets come in. But I was disappointed that Riot would eschew the people that brought them to where they're at, including Dig, especially, as being one of the longest standing members of the esports league for Riot. I was very disappointed that they were like, hey, we don't care that much about you because now these people can give us more. It felt like a popularity contest, like Homecoming. Like, hey, thanks for your help, bye.
Yeah, and Dig's Funny is a great example to bring up, because they were backed by an NBA org. They were backed by the Philadelphia 76ers, who owned the team. So it's not even that they didn't have the basketball money. I guess it was the wrong basketball money. So that's a little bit interesting to me. Matt, I feel like you maybe have a different opinion on this. Where do you come from in terms of what stood out to you as far as what you think Riot was looking for?
I think everyone's looking at the wrong kind of money. So in a conversation in a decision-making process like this, most of the teams, because what I would guess is that they probably narrowed it down to a list of maybe 15 or 20. And most of the teams in this group have that investment money. They're all the 20 million versus 35 million investment. At that point, the investment level doesn't matter. I think what Riot was looking for, and because this is a revenue sharing model they're trying to establish, is the ability to bring in revenue from outside the organization. They don't care if the organization has enough money to fund themselves. I just don't think they do. I think they wanted to bring in money. They wanted teams that could bring in money from outside to contribute up to this pool that's going to be shared to other teams. And when you think about that spectrum, Immortals seems like actually one of the worst choices, because I have no problem with an organization choosing to be picky with their sponsors. But if you look at Immortals, they're sponsored by Omen, a Canadian gaming chair company that sells $1,800 gaming chairs. So that's a super, super niche market. And a very, very niche peripheral manufacturer called Bloody. Whereas like other teams have Logitech or Razer and this huge list of sponsors like Red Bull, and they're bringing this outside money. So I think, and I get the point about Noah Winston clearly being almost Ember-like in how forward he is with talking about how much he cares about the players and creating a good working environment. I don't think Riot cares about that, because really, that should be the standard. It shouldn't be a thing that's like, oh, wow, we're super surprised this team has a really good work environment. You don't think the Cavaliers or the Rockets or the Golden State Warriors are going to create like an exceptional working environment? They're going to do what Echo Fox did, and probably then some, because these guys have the money to do like the Chinese organizations can do and go and build some 5-story glass office building where they're going to have this huge, awesome training facility with kitchens and living spaces, sleeping areas, all this stuff that you would expect from a top-notch training facility. So I think at this point, that amount of money doesn't matter as far as how much money the organization has. That doesn't matter. I think what ended up mattering was how much money that Riot thought that teams could bring in from the outside. So there was that article that I think intentionally came out second, and I actually called Wolf on this on Twitter I was just like, hey, you updated your article 2 hours after it came out about Immortals not coming out about, there was this other rumor from the same source that Riot didn't like their books because they were bleeding money. They were self-supporting themselves with their VC money because they weren't either choosing not to bring in sponsors because they didn't like who they could get, or they just were struggling to get sponsors because that is very hard if you're a new organization who isn't TSM, CLG, or Cloud9 with history of success. And they're like, what are they going to do? Promise? Be like, next year we'll be able to get plenty of sponsors. Don't worry, we got this. And Riot's probably looking at this like you have, and now of all traditional sports leagues, no league is better at marketing itself than the NBA. 100%. Especially at marketing individual talent. The NBA excels at marketing individual talent, and that's where we've seen league having a history of success. People follow teams, but you also get these huge fandoms of players. And I think TSM looks at and sees we can make this a Bjergsen into a LeBron, and all these sponsors can sell Bjergsen keyboards, Bjergsen mouses, right? Or all sorts of you might have a Bjergsen Red Bull, whatever his preferred energy drink is. And so I can clearly see why that would be involved. I can see why they would love Cloud9 getting a WWE investment because WWE has a good streaming platform. And above that, WWE travels around the country to all sorts of venues and in 2 days creates these exceptional live viewing events. And they just go.
I see where you're coming from. I do want to give Orzaidus some time to respond here. But because I could give you a list of sponsors that Envious had that all matched the kind of list that you just gave me for all these other teams. I could also give you a list of just the sheer volume of investor capital that Immortals did have behind them, and Immortals is on the record. I'm just saying, Immortals has refuted that response from Riot as well, that they said that all their books are fine, and so that's a hard thing to pin down. But I want to hear from you, Xander. So where do you? Okay. What details do you think popped out to you the most?
I think when part of it too that no one's really discussed here is that you have to look at the outside contracts that they were taking and how substantial those bids must have been. People are definitely spending a lot of time focusing on why certain orgs didn't make it over others. But at the end of the day, Riot had to make the hard choice of choosing. Clearly, the Cavs, Rockets, and Golden State had insane bids. These bids I think these bids are ludicrous, personally. And I think that these were no-brainers, that they basically had to take these three. So then you look at these teams that are gone. Dignitas, everyone says this storied organization, they got relegated. I mean, they technically lost their spot and had to buy it back. It's not like, and it's not even like they went the FlyQuest route. They didn't earn it in the same regard. So, then you have Envy. Like I said, I think that while Envy had a lot of good sponsors, they had some bad sponsors. They had some sponsorship there that was not necessarily, that was not negative, but maybe contentious or something that could become part of an argument, like things that the MLB and NFL are dealing with, that maybe they didn't want to have that if they could go with ones that they knew were safer. And given that they brought in an expert here to help them assess this, I think that it's pretty obvious why they at least had to accept these few. And again, I think FlyQuest over Immortals is an extreme likelihood in my mind, or would have been prior to, just because it was a self-made team, and Immortals possibly has this Overwatch, issue going on, and Riot clearly wants to be separated from Overwatch, despite CSGO and some of these other ones that are already established. They're there. These teams are there. Overwatch is a budding league. And if Immortals is trying to be the flagship in LA, that is contentious.
And I do understand that contention. I think that there's that argument has come up quite a bit, and I do want to get into it. But I'm seeing some head shakes from Riley before we move on. That I just want to.
Of course, I would love to hear her.
I want to give a chance to respond.
so we basically just said that. So Matt mentioned that some of the sponsors that League didn't like. Mm-hmm. And I think all of the ones you mentioned are Overwatch sponsors for teams that are well known. That's the picture is actually Team Canada.
I'll include the picture in the description because obviously the podcast listeners can't see it.
Sorry, it's a picture of Team Canada and their sponsor, which is Omen. So since we brought it up, let's talk about it. Overwatch announced some major stuff over the weekend. They asked for $20 million, which was not the same as Riot's $10 million / $13 million, depending on whether you're buying in or returning. And what you get in response for that was, I was impressed. So previously I was like, damn, I don't know if Overwatch has what it takes. And this weekend they announced full player support. They announced they are actually providing prize money that's counts as prize money and not as peanuts. For every single one of the seasons, and then for the Worlds at the end, they are providing individual team skins on 2 colors, home and away. They are actually hosting Play Overwatch for the entire first. Keep saying that it's their Twitter handle, not their actual league. The Owl, we'll call it, for the whole first year. And they are providing housing and all of that stuff for the teams as they work on their own infrastructure to have home and away games. They have actually created from the ground up a league that looks just like pro sports leagues, which seems like what Riot was going for when they invited these new teams in. So, it's $20 million, but what they're getting back for their $20 million is pretty freaking impressive, I think. They created an entire league sponsored by Blizzard itself, and I was really happy about that. Obviously, there's some things that are still kind of up in the air, things we don't know about, but I got a chance to see and meet some of the players, and they're pretty great, too. Kind of a side point, they were a little bit older than I expected. I thought the Overwatch kids would be, super young. A lot of them are, but they also have, for example, Flower can't play this year because he's not old enough. But we had a really good time, and I really thought, wow, Overwatch has legitimate staying power. They redesigned their spectator mode to be a little bit more easy to follow. I think a lot of the early watchers of Overwatch had a lot of problems. I certainly had a lot of problems following, especially people like Tracer that were all over the place. So I think the infrastructure that's available is high, and League has a huge standard now to catch up, actually, with Overwatch, despite their 7 years advantage. And I really think that we have what it takes. As to sponsors, so Overwatch put this great infrastructure in, this huge ground-up building, forced people not to use their own logos, which I'm still iffy about. But they are using the sponsors that supposedly League didn't accept for half as much money and not nearly as much support, so I'm not sure that that's a valid point.
Okay, I'll jump in there. I get what you're saying. I do think I would disagree with your point that League has to catch up because I believe Riot sets the standard when it comes to production value and structure. And we're doing this a little early because we know the teams are in, but we don't know the full details of what Riot intends to do with, obviously, the NA LCS franchises. I will say that you're correct in probably saying that stuff like the incentivized skins are going to go to the money will go to the Overwatch teams. Riot's got a 7-year lead, and they do 100% need to do a better job of creating revenue.
I'm just going to interrupt, not to change the point, but I didn't mean to say that they were going to give the money to the points. I'm just saying that they made them skins for in-game. It's just for viewership. That's it.
Oh,
so when you watch,
viewership.
Right.
Oh,
so when you watch a
game,
you'll be able to tell which one's on which. It's not. If there's no.
Okay, so I jumped the gun. Okay.
Yeah,
all right, that's fine. I guess I'll say that. To me, you're still looking at a viewership issue before we can really say that the Overwatch League is going to make it. They did decent, right, over the weekend, 100,000 to 300,000.
Peak was about 300,000, which is about it's more than you would get from most esports. It's not quite hitting CS:GO yet. Certainly not hitting the nearly, I think it was 3 million that we were seeing at 2 a.m. PST for the World Championship. But it's like you said, it's a huge gap there. I want to hear from you or Orzaidus real quick before we segue this into Immortals, which I think is the most specific example of some of these larger, broader conversations that we're having.
So I think that something that consistently has gotten overlooked with Overwatch, and first let me clarify, I was a top 100 Blood Death Knight more than one time in World of Warcraft, and I also was Master in Overwatch last season, so I'm very familiar with these Blizzard products. And the fact that Blizzard is consistently mirroring League, yet they don't have the viewership. They don't have the same quality of product, because watching Overwatch is still not nearly as satisfying as watching League. And that's coming from someone, again, who did play that game at a high level, and I did enjoy it, but it has much more inherent issues just in what it is than League does. League has the benefit of being this top-down, comfortable thing that people have been seeing for 20 years. Again, it's a different battle that Overwatch has that does get overlooked in their valuations, I feel.
Yeah, I agree.
Totally fair. And I'm going to have at least a couple of you probably on in the future to talk about Overwatch League in general, because I think there's a lot to take in from this weekend. I want to shift away from that a little bit and get back onto the NA franchising, specifically with Immortals. And I'm going to start with you, Matt, by bringing up, you mentioned investment being a problem in terms of the kind of sponsors that they were grabbing in. And of course, we could go into, like, is Omen enough of a sponsor, not enough of a sponsor? That is one of those things we're never going to be able to pin down. We do know that there was significant investment from AEG, AEG, the entertainment company. We had Lionsgate, the Lincoln Park investment group that was going on there. A lot of money involved from places that you would imagine would be able to have the same amount of advertising that you brought up as being so important for these teams going forward, the same ability to reach out. And of course, we also have articles that have been coming out from people like Romain, the Unicorns of Love manager, talking about how difficult it is for anyone outside of the first kind of top tier of teams to get sponsorship, given how the sort of relegation system would incentivize companies to only stick to the couple they know will be there and kind of ignore the rest until proven otherwise. So to me, I saw that and I went, well, okay, Immortals have proven that they know how to reach out to businesses that matter. They have proven that they know how to run a team to the best of their capability and have done a very good job with that. They've proven that they are passionate about League of Legends, and they've proven that they're willing to invest in a solid roster to the extent that they made it to the World Championship this year. So I guess my assumption would be that a team who's accomplished all of that would not have struggled to find sponsors. Do you believe that? Well, first of all, do you believe that they would have been able to figure out? Do you believe that Riot believed they could figure it out? Or do you think that there are other issues than the financial, which probably played more of a factor in their final decision?
So I guess here's the thing, and I don't want to come out and outwardly bash someone because I don't know anyone in the IMT organization. But I would say Immortals has been a top tier team over the last 2 years in the NA LCS. I don't think, putting aside maybe underwhelming performance in playoffs in their first few splits, they were a very successful team during the regular split. They're a very successful team during the regular split this year. They made it to Worlds. So I guess I don't think it's accurate to maybe group them in a NVS or maybe I'm grouping with any of the other teams that have joined the LCS last 2 years that have are recent, because they've been recent and successful. So I guess I would fault the organization itself for either not being able to get sponsors or being too picky. Like I would love to just be like, go up to them and be like, hey, so what was your thought process here? And I do realize that the sponsorship thing it's argumentative, but I would like to point out something along the lines of, so TSM has T-Mobile, Gillette, Red Bull, and Geico. T-Mobile is all four of these companies are gigantic national or international corporations. Gillette especially is rather famous actually for sponsoring top athletes.
Well,
that does
here.
So
I accepted, like, the top tier of teams it's a little bit different, but when you look at someone like FlyQuest sponsors, I think they're in
the same boat. They're in the same boat.
So I don't. That's where I have a problem with that argument. So maybe let's go over to you real quick, Orzaidus. I'll come back to you in a bit, Matt. But where do you think that ultimately ends up?
Well, again, I think that we just need to classify FlyQuest as an exception first and foremost. I once again, I just think because of how they got to where they are, that had a big part in why they got to stay. I think that Riot, when they're talking about this, if this is a league 10 years from now, they want to be able to say, hey, look at that one team of guys that made it through, the guys that were here the whole time, got dropped because they were too old, they were washed up, whatever. They came back, made it up through Challenger, pulled the strings they needed to get the sponsorships, and they got that. I think that because of that, Riot wants them to kind of be like a story, even if, again, I don't think that that when we talk about all of these teams that and bringing up FlyQuest is a good example, just because I really do feel that they are kind of a unicorn in this sense. They're just an exception. So when we look at the other stuff, the other teams, we have to really heavily look at what sponsors they had, and that's why all the sponsors Matt's bringing up, and the issues that Immortals had, not so much with winning or with organizational outreach, but more so, in my opinion, they were playing a larger game, the bigger organizational game, and it got too involved in what Riot is trying to do. And I really do think that had the most to do with it. They were just too many areas of contention, and Riot is trying to focus purely on growing League of Legends. And if they have some community backlash over one successful team, it's okay, because they're allowing this other. Again, that FlyQuest was my, in my mind, placates what happens with Immortals, because no one really cares that much about Dig, who lost their spot, and P1 and Envy.
And it's interesting that you say that, because my response then would be, but Optic got through. And Optic is a team that is very much in other games and built their reputation through shooters, still very primarily invested in shooting games. So if it's about, it does feel like it's a weird combination of all these factors.
Just to rebuttal on that one point real quick, though, they're not budding shooting games. Overwatch is the only one whose rise is directly contentious with League. CSGO is already established. CSGO has been established. Counter-Strike is an entire thing in itself and separate. And most of what Optic has been in has not been involved in a game that was competing with League of Legends. So I think that needs to be another clear distinction we have to make.
For sure. But Optic does own an Overwatch League team. For the record.
Oh, no, I understand that, but not in LA.
But not in LA. And that's where I turn to you, Riley. Do you think that LA spot was the kicker here ultimately? And all of this, of course, we talk about it from kind of a factual standpoint, but I also want to get into do we think this is the best choice for Riot in the long-term standpoint? And since you are so much a part of the day-to-day interactions, with some of these things, and you see fans, firsthand watching at these arenas, where do you come down when you hear these kinds of arguments being brought up?
Two questions. First, is that what everybody really thinks is going on with FlyQuest? That they got dismissed because they were old?
There's a lot of...
it's a narrative.
I'm asking legitimately, is that what most fans think is going on with them?
I think it was clear that Cloud9 did not think that they were good enough to start on their roster, and Cloud9 thought that they could make a lot of money selling a challenger spot that then got into the LCS, which they did. It made a lot of money. Yeah. And High made an article about how, we're trying to grow talent by then not growing any talent. Right. So it's not quite that they were old enough. But
Jensen. A rare opportunity to grab Jensen. He was available at that exact moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that was a legitimate question I was asking.
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
And then what was the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just talking about where do you think these arguments that you're hearing when we talk about
the
financial
LA
money
team,
and
right?
the LA team, does that hold water to you? And where do you stand on that from your own emotional fan related perspective? Because obviously I have my feelings as an Immortals fan, and I do want to start tapping into that a little bit as we kind of explore these arguments a bit more.
Okay, so I think obviously this is totally just me making stuff up. I have nobody told me anything about anything. But I do think that there was the implicit comment that they would have to choose if they were going to choose an LA team between League and Overwatch. And although you made a valid point that Overwatch has not yet shown that it will have the same viewership as League, so I say this, I love both games, okay, but League is 8 years old. This is literally, we're going on season 8. How long do you, if you had to guess, say the average esports lasts? I mean, StarCraft just went free to play, and let's say I was 15 years ago. So you as an organization, new or old, you've got to start thinking about the future. And if someone offers you what Overwatch has offered them and gave it to them for sure, well before League of Legends, or Riot, I should say, published their opinions, and I'm sure the teams had time before it was published, but some maybe not, since some of the players didn't even know what was going on until it was published. I think you have to go with what you think will benefit your organization as a whole. And if Overwatch says, yes, we're going to give you Los Angeles as your base, and we are offering this much, and this is what we're giving you in return for your money, you have to say yes, especially if you don't know for sure that League's gonna, or that Riot's gonna let you through. And I think that that's a smart decision for a team like Immortals, which is new, has good sponsors, has good player support, and has strong talent available to them. Several of the players that played this last week are joining Valiant after this season, and I think that's a good decision. It's going with something you know will make you money. You are going to have local fans because IMT is already well established there. I think it was a good decision. I'm maybe a little sad that Riot felt the need to establish their dominance by not allowing them to be a part of both, but you know.
Yeah, Matt, your thoughts? Because I know we've got to get back to you on this for sure.
So I will often try to compare, and for years this is just how I've viewed esports in general, is I've tried to look at through the lens of professional sports, because that is where I stem a lot of my competitive fandom from, is professional sports. And I think we're beyond the point where we need to. I don't think StarCraft is a good comparison for League and Overwatch anymore. I think it was popular in a different time in technology, truthfully. Back when good internet and quality computers weren't as ubiquitous as they are now, where my mom's first laptop was $2,000 with 40 gigabytes of RAM of storage and 512 gigabytes of RAM. It was ridiculous. So I think StarCraft in its heyday was just occurred during the wrong time, and I don't think it's an apt comparison anymore. I don't agree with the narrative that we should be talking about League as a game that's on the downside or even halfway through its lifespan. I think League and Overwatch are two things that could potentially consider for decades. We could be viewing the start of the next big sport. I would imagine people in the early days looked at basketball or football and were like, this looks a little ridiculous. People are just throwing a ball through a hoop. That's not going to last very long. And I would be hesitant to fall into that narrative because I think it's different. I think that when Noah tried to play 5D chess, he wanted to be able to kind of have everything. And that's okay, but he lost. So I guess we can't be upset about it. Because he tried against both leagues. He clearly knew that there is a distinction between being in the Overwatch League and being the LA team in the Overwatch League. I definitely agree with Xander when he says that they definitely line up competitively compared to, say, CSGO and the first-person shooter games, especially because Reddit was filled with comments for the first 6 months after Overwatch about how Overwatch was going to be the end of League because its PC Bang stream numbers were PC Bang play percentages were a lot higher than League. And I can see where Riot, after getting beat down every month about see, Overwatch is going to be more popular. Overwatch is going to be more popular over and over again. I can see where they could be like, yeah, see, not going to happen. And you'll also notice that Overwatch's play has dropped considerably percentage-wise in Korea since then. It's hovering at like 11-12%. PUBG is eating its lunch. And I think that's because, and I think the Overwatch League long-term is less stable and a less stable investment than League because by nature, FPS-style games, and I think most would agree that Overwatch is some kind of combination of MOBA and first-person shooter game. Their players tend to be much more fickle. A new Call of Duty game comes out, people switch to it, and then the new Battlefield game comes out, and people abandon Call of Duty and switch to Battlefield. And that's just how the casual people play. And even when you look at like games like Smash, new Smash game comes out, people temporarily abandon the old one, and obviously both older Smash and newer Smash games have great communities now, but games like that in general, I think, you're looking at FPS fans being more fickle, and the potential for Overwatch to die to the next big FPS fad, like a PUBG, is not zero. And I think this assumption that Overwatch is such a great investment is, I disagree. I think it's worth the bet. I mean, these organizations got tons of money. Could you imagine having invested into the NFL when it first started, and now you're billions and billions of dollars? So these guys look like for a small $10 or $20 million investment, I could be in charge of a $1 billion franchise 10 years from now.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because this is a conversation that we've had with Yost Milan in the past, the Unicorns of Love owner. When he was on, he talked about it's very easy to get $5 million together if that's all you really want. It's a lot more difficult to know how to use it and then make it grow the way you want it to. So that's a conversation we're going to continue to have with the Overwatch League. Orzaidus, did you have any more thoughts as we kind of transition through this topic here?
Yeah, no, I just additionally wanted to touch on, like he said, the growth and that I really like this point about Noah Winston trying to play 5D chess. I also just think Noah Winston played it properly for Immortals. If he knew he essentially had to make a choice here, and he has a choice between still being number 3 or number 4 in League of Legends, or potentially having a shot at first with Overwatch League. I mean, even if Overwatch League doesn't make it to the same level of success as League of Legends, it's likely to, you're more likely to be more lucrative being number 1 in Overwatch League than being number 4 or number 3 in League of Legends, consistently behind TSM, consistently behind Cloud9, especially, now with their international success again. It's just too difficult, I think, to fault it purely on, what they were doing in League of Legends and how great it was, but also it's a game that all these businesses are playing together, and Immortals played what was right for them, but it did cost them their league spot. I still think that that's okay, and it's okay for Riot, and it's okay for Immortals. Sucks for Immortals League fans. I feel for you guys, I do, because they were a great organization, but, at the end of the day, I think both parties made the right choice, because I don't think, like I said, I don't think Optic has as much, headbutting there as Immortals does with that LA spot for Overwatch specifically. It's just, again, they both made the right decision, and again, just sucks for you guys.
Yeah, I will give my closing feelings, but I want to hear from Rylea one more time before we wrap this up. Any final thoughts, Rylea?
I actually kind of agree. I think it was the best decision for Immortals. I don't think he made a wrong decision, and I'm sad about the people I love. But the other thing I was going to say is, before that, Matt commented that PUBG, and I don't think that's comparing apples to apples, because PUBG is a startup with these really great developers that have very little infrastructure, and they're barely keeping up with their people, which is not a bad thing. That means that their game is way more popular than they expected. But Activision Blizzard has this huge background, and they've failed before, but they've also failed before. PUBG hasn't, right? Like, they haven't even tried. They will, and I think it'll be great, but at the moment, I don't think they're comparing the same league.
That's
but
fair.
I do think that that your point is correct, though, that Immortals made the best decision for their own players and their own franchise. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do miss them already.
Yeah, I'm seeing here. I have some mixed feelings about the Overwatch League. Just to really quick touch on that, because I don't think we're going to touch on Overwatch again after this. I think that it's great on paper. I think, we've seen in League of Legends it took about 3 or 4 years for them to get the spectator client to where they want it to be. I would have preferred to see Overwatch grow out their native audience a little bit more before asking for that 20 mil right away. I would have liked to see more spectator improvements than we've seen so far, though I did think they improved at the World Cup. I think there's still some ways to go before it's accessible to people who aren't already familiar with the game, and that's a criticism I am hearing and continue to hear. I think that's one that Blizzard's going to have to address, and I think a healthy bit of skepticism there is fair, especially because they have done a terrible job with every other esport that they've run in terms of how they have purposely, not even purposely, but have made decisions that submarined it into the ground. And we are assuming with Overwatch League, I don't want to get to the point where like we're rooting for Overwatch League to fail because I'm seeing that negativity on Twitter. I don't think that's the way to go. But I also think that we need to keep that in mind when we talk about, it's the right choice for Immortals. It might be the right choice. We don't know.
I'm
they're
great at
gambling on
Overwatch.
it.
I hope it goes well.
Yeah, look, they're gambling on it as much as we are, and certainly they'll have to look at that. What I would say is, as an Immortals fan, and as someone who went to the finals in Boston and who bought an Immortals jersey while I was there and had my cousin buy an Immortals jersey when I was there, and Riot spent all of this time and energy. They had Noah Winston on a panel talking about the future of franchise owners that they have on their YouTube channel publicly, and they also had all this time where they were promoting these huge storylines at Worlds about Immortals and how important this team was and how great this team was and how great the ownership of this team was. That, to me, it felt like the way Riot's handled this is a little bit insulting towards the people who they asked to get invested in this. As a fan, I think the fact that they heard this rumor and have said nothing about it, and certainly haven't done anything to, try to put fan hearts at ease or anything like that, I do think it's a little insensitive, I guess is the nice way I could put it. I also do have to wonder, Overwatch League didn't care whether you got a League of Legends franchise spot. That wasn't part of their criteria. Blizzard wasn't worried about it. They said we wanted the best, I think it's 12 owners right now for Overwatch League. We want the best 12 people we can find. And to me, I don't think that game of chicken, I guess, that we're talking about, this proverbial, 5-dimensional chess game that Noah Winston was playing, I'm not sure the game needed to be played. I don't think that we are in a world right now in which there could not have been a successful Immortals Overwatch team and a Immortals team that was really well run in League of Legends and kept doing all the things they do well, because they've proven already they know how to balance multiple esports teams. They've proven already that these are, the Riot program doesn't change just because Immortals is or is not on their list of teams that are playing every weekend. They're still having the exact same conflict. If that's the argument, well, to that point, it's a pride thing, not really a this is the best people we could have signed for it thing. Like, you understand why maybe as a fan, I just see that as like it's a cop-out. It's, they're in the Overwatch League, so we're now competing with them, and we don't let competing people in. Whereas Overwatch has taken a very different approach for that. Matt, you had a question I guess you wanted to ask me?
Yes, one quick question.
Absolutely.
Do we think the Immortals narrative changes, or this result is different if they do better at Worlds? If they get to say semifinals, does Riot say we are going to kick the first NA team to make semifinals out of the LCS? Do you think performance could have saved them, is my question. This happens a lot. It's like the Red Sox just fired their manager, and the GM said, winning the World Series would not have saved him.
Yeah, look, on the one hand, I have to imagine that it wouldn't, because the stories were being leaked while Worlds was still going on, before we knew that Immortals was eliminated, which would imply that the decision had already been made. But at the same time, that would have been a really hard sell for Riot, harder than it's already going to be. And while I would say that so far, they haven't really had that much backlash towards kicking Immortals or Dignitas out of the league. The fan reaction has been very mild comparatively. Everyone's been very excited about how fun this Worlds has been, which they should, and is probably why it got leaked to ESPN around this time, hint, hint, nod, nod. But it does feel like they think they're going to be able to get away with this regardless of how well that performance may or may not have gone. It definitely would have been harder had they gotten farther. Orzaidus, it sounds like you got one more quick point before we close this.
Yeah. The quick point. We've talked a lot about the contention between Overwatch and League, but we didn't, and how the 5D chess didn't need to be played. I agree. I don't think it needed to be played, but at the same time, you got to remember, this is League's grandpa. Like, this is, Dota's dad, right? And so they're always fighting with dad. But this is still grandpa, and you want to separate yourself, just as you see everything, you want to make yourself different. So I think that just adds to the point where, it didn't need to be played, but Riot was going to play this game no matter what.
Yeah. And at some point, it's on Immortals that they know what the rules are going to be, whether you agree with the rules or not. And personally, I don't. Seems like Rylea, you don't either.
They don't even play on the same days, to be honest. It's ridiculous.
I know. I'm tracking.
and that's, and as an Immortals fan, that's obviously frustrating to me. I'm very curious. This will be one of those things. Like, I can't wait to read the comment section underneath this video because I would love to see how that's gonna go. I'm sure YouTube is always very civil, but I would want to transition to the end here, which is, where do we think the impact of this ultimately lies? Because all of this right now, we're still very much in the speculation game. We still don't know what the ultimate financial situation is going to look like, how Riot plans on improving their monetization in this regard, which they haven't necessarily been great at so far in their history. But I want to look at how do we think this affects the LCS experience? And Rylea, I want to start with you because you're there every week. Where do you think this ultimately leaves fans who have been supportive of the LCS before? Is this ultimately a positive, negative, doesn't change anything because the new teams will just come in and get their new fans and none of this will matter ultimately? Like, where do you see this ending up?
Okay, so my first thing that I took away from it is those players have to go somewhere. Nobody's gonna let Pobelter go home. Like, why would you? That would be stupid. The second thing I thought of is, hey, I'm a Cloud9 fan, and it doesn't really change anything for me, right? Like, I mean, worst case scenario, Impact goes home like he wants to, life goes on. However, then, since we made this a lot about Overwatch versus League, actually, no, we didn't, Riot did.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
I saw the opening, what do you call it, cinematic? Did you watch it, Chase?
Yes.
I cried. I was like, really? They, literally from the stage made this comment that says, we are this community. This is our community. We don't, regardless of what they actually do, Riot has never, ever come out and said, these people are ours. We are behind them. Which is, I mean, gosh, I think I told you this the other day in text. Riot literally made a gamer girl support, joke from a cast. Not that long ago, in the last month. And so in terms of being a part of the community as a whole, obviously I have my friends, I really enjoy it, I go every week, so it's not like I don't like it. But I do feel like Riot went out of their way to say, these people belong to us. This is a community where everyone belongs. And that means something to me. Even though I did recently have them respond to one of my support tickets by saying, we can't help you, you're a streamer. But when it all comes down to it, I don't think it will affect the majority of the people. I mean, let's be honest, they still chant TSM at games where TSM's not even playing.
And Optic's going to be just as bad, for the record. Anyone who doesn't think that
Optic,
so I hear.
Well, and Optic versus TSM. That's a nice little thing we're getting to. Which, yeah.
Right. So I don't think that next year this time next year we're not going to care. But I do care that one of them has gone out of their way to make an overt statement that says you belong here and we want you here. I don't play Overwatch as well as I don't play anything seriously anymore. My work schedule says, hey, you're going to do this. But, back in the day, I was a Diamond SC2 player and I was the only female that I know of that was. And I didn't feel like they treated me like, oh, you're the gamer girl. And back in the day, I had as many female WoW players as male players on my list. And I was the tank, which is unusual for a female player. And I didn't feel like, oh God, you're a girl, don't tell anyone. And I do feel that. I chose a very non-gendered screen name that became my screen name because I was choosing it for League of Legends and I knew what kind of community it was. Not that Delia is super, super gendered, but it is. When it comes down to it, the choices that they made for their pro league is not going to matter whether or not I play their game and spend money on it. What matters to me is that I have a community of people in which I feel safe and that I have a good time, because nobody, whether you're winning or losing, at least you're having a good time one way or the other. And I don't feel that that's always true when playing League of Legends, and I don't know that the decisions that they've made regarding their pro league is going to change that. So maybe no, it doesn't really matter to me. I think it's kind of stupid, and I really hate that they made it a two-man race between two games that I love, but I don't know.
But that's fair, and all of those factors obviously they're going to weigh into whatever you're a fan of. I think it's very hard to separate your feelings on a game from the feelings of their professional league. It all is tied together inextricably, and it should be. So I definitely hear everything you're saying. Orzaidus, I want to move to you. Where do you see this ultimately ending up? Do you think it's going to be much more about the game than these kinds of moves, or is there a potential impact here in terms of how Riot's able to handle things moving forward?
I mean, I really think that I think that your sentiment echoes perfectly what Blizzard has chased for the last 10 years, and that is creating a safe and fun environment. However, that is counterintuitive to what esports, competition, and what all this money really bode. You look at the NFL and how it separated itself and rose higher than the MLB and NBA, and it was through competition and it being more aggressive. And I think League is pursuing that. I think League is taking money from NBA investors and taking money from MLB BAM, but I think that those two sports are helping them imitate what the NFL is doing, except they're going to do it better. And Overwatch, because they are Activision and Blizzard, they do create these wonderful, safe, and fun environments, but they are not conducive to long-term successful competition. And I hope that Overwatch League is successful, but I think that your sentiment perfectly sums up why they have not been successful. Because if that is what you are chasing, then you are not chasing the success of grander competition. And that's maybe a little bit harsh of a point of view.
True.
But I mean, sincerely, they do seek to put out a product that is fun and safe for everybody, and I think they do a fantastic job. I think Overwatch is so approachable on from so many levels, whereas League, even just getting it started, there's a reason why they're overhauling the level 30 system. I mean, that thing's been brutal for years, and I love that game, and I've got like 9 accounts, and still every time I'm just like, oh my god, what am I doing? Yeah. And Blizzard through WoW found a way to make doing stuff like that fun, and they imitated what Call of Duty did right to draw in casual audiences. But again, I think that what it boils down to is definitely we didn't need to have this fight between the two, but with the money and where it's coming from, it was almost inevitable. And where it's all going to pan out, once again, I have to agree. I don't think anyone really is going to care. I think that where the business models go will matter most for longevity. But outside of that, everyone's getting a better deal. All the viewers are getting a better deal. These teams are getting more money. These leagues are getting more money, and we're just going to get a better product from both businesses.
I mean, that's totally fair. I want to close with you, Matt. Where do you agree, disagree? Is this ultimately none of this matters, and all these other factors that have been brought up by Rylea and Xander are going to be what sticks with us, or do you think there is an impact from this?
Yeah, I don't think it matters as far as like long term. I don't think the loss of IMT is going to be a big deal for the overall health of the league. Mm-hmm. I do think we've kind of missed mentioning in this Overwatch / League debate is, and Rylea brought this up, is that after next year, Overwatch is going to a real traditional sports hub. You are traveling to play your opponents in other teams, in other cities, and we have no word from Riot on that yet, right? So far, all we know is that people are still playing at the LCS studios in LA, right?
Correct. So
I think that adds a layer of risk to the Overwatch League that right now League doesn't have. I think it's very overall. Blizzard is making a very big play. They're making a very, very, very big play. They're going for broke. The Riot Historics organization, I think it's very safe to say that they're a very safe organization. We're 8 years into their existence, and I don't think they've done nearly as good of a job monetizing their own IP as they could be. At this point, I think League should have TV shows, video games, and TV shows, animes, movies, figurines, everywhere. Like, it should be ubiquitous. Riot plays it very safe. So I think there's a potential for Overwatch to maybe grow at a faster rate than League because they're making that big gamble. They could also crash and burn. I think League is very stable. I don't think it'll have a long-term impact on the success of League. I think 5 years from now, we're still talking about League of Legends is the number one esport. I think 10 years from now, we're probably still talking about League of Legends number one esport. And I think that might be a bold call. But I will say this: StarCraft is still around. And I think League's success is more sustainable just because it's I think you can turn into League and pick up the viewership experience relatively quickly. You can't pick up playing it relatively quickly. That's, as Xander said, that grind is real. And honestly, like, when I started playing, like a month after beta ended, there was 40 champions. Now there's like 140. So like learning all of that, like not even level up grind, like you need hundreds of games just so you get that built-in knowledge of being able to react to certain spells without thinking.
Not to mention the toxicity grind.
Right. So like, because you have to get to the point where you subconsciously know that like I am in this champion's threat circle. So that's a distraction. So we haven't mentioned sponsorships, right, which I do want to talk about, and I expect that League will do a better job of attracting sponsorships in the Overwatch League will, only because I think the Overwatch League's branding is really off, actually. I don't think that's where I think League has done a better job of kind of allowing more originality, which I think does a better job of breeding fandom and teams kind of embracing things more than this generic like LA, like what is a Valiant?
The New York Excelsior is the one that sticks out in my mind. Is a little bit.
It's their logo is bad. It's just like, did I just buy like a team?
It just sounds
logo?
like a soccer team to me.
Yeah,
honestly.
Did I just buy a team's apparel, or is that just a chic new pattern at Macy's for like my pillows?
Yeah.
I challenge your comment of originality by saying that Overwatch literally made them come up with new brands. Like, totally.
To be fair, and let's not act like all League team names are great too. Like, FlyQuest exists.
Are NBA teams, and NBA teams are prohibited from using their branding in other sports.
So
it's built into the NBA charter, which is probably So in general, I think League doesn't have the branding problem that Overwatch is going to have, and I think unfortunately we keep bringing Overwatch because it's impossible to look at these two leagues through a prism that doesn't involve the two leagues anymore. Yeah. They're inextricably tied for the rest of their existence because this is like, and Xander brought up the sports analogy. A bunch of rich people tried to create another football league like 40 years ago.
Twice, the XFL, and there were 2 times.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about the big one where like Trump bought a team, all this stuff, and they went out and bought players because the NFL didn't have free agency at the time, and NFL's still nowhere near as like the NBA or Major League Baseball as far as the strength of their players' union. And it crashed and burned in a year. So I would be hesitant to. I think Overwatch might end up in trouble if I'm gonna ask you this question: if someone tells you 5 years from now only one of these two leagues will exist, which one's still around?
Yeah, I'll let you guys answer that. Riley.
I know that you think that League is stable and that you think it's going to last for much longer than other teams will, and it will last longer, I think, than a lot of people expect. But it's kind of, I don't even know how to describe the lethargy, maybe?
Well, what's your answer to the question?
No, I do think that Overwatch is just getting started, and I think it'll last in 5 years. It'll definitely last 5 years.
Well, no, that wasn't the question. The question is if someone tells you only one's still around.
I know, but have you seen the, like...
This is a hypothetical. If only one is still around...
She answered, her answer is Overwatch. That was her answer.
Okay, all right.
Because there's just so little... I don't know if new talent's the right word, but just there is a definite feeling of exhaustion or tiredness coming out of the new crops of League players. just, and I don't even know how to describe that except that I've met them, and they just seem very like. Not that they're not good. They're definitely good. I mean, I've watched Acadian. I've watched a lot of guys that came out contracts and other people. But it's just, there is definitely a shift in now you're going to have to learn, as you mentioned, 140 champions. Because the new champs coming in, the new people coming in have to have at least 3 mains. You can't have less than that. And there's a lot of things that are, it's just so big, it's like outgrown itself. And interestingly, you mentioned that 2 directors recently left Riot to work on a secret project, which sounds a little to me like abandoning the ship, I guess.
Well,
I don't know.
Daddy Tencent had some feelings about that. Let's that's a whole other podcast. I'm gonna wrap it up here because I feel like
I didn't mean to like bring up another subject. You asked me why.
There's a lot of
Xander, what's your answer?
Yeah, Xander, real quick.
Oh, so I would say League because I've seen what Blizzard has done with World of Warcraft with 15 years worth of chances, and I was a part of it, and I gave them opportunities. You have to understand, I've literally been burned by them since I was 12 years old, and because of that, even though I'm a fan of Overwatch, it's got inherent issues, and at the highest levels, there were players that took months off of time. When was the last time you watched a Challenger League player take more than a week or 2 off? You haven't, and it wasn't and it was because of inherent issues with the game, which League has not had. So the product is still better.
What do you call Ardent Censor?
Oh, no. The meta. No. Don't get me wrong. Metas can be terrible, but the metas haven't been so bad that they're becoming unplayable because Overwatch still has things where you can get one shot. And anytime you have a game where you can get one shot, the level of rage you feel that makes you want to quit is much higher. It just is. And that's why that's why League got rid of things, like people being able to one shot with like Pantheon Q. It was for that reason. And I just think that Overwatch has more issues with its product, its core product. Regardless of how the League is doing and everything, it's the core product and their core market. And League has done a better job securing those 2 things, in my opinion.
Here, my final thoughts on your question, Matt, and addressing both of you. I would say League, and I would say League because Riot has been very slow and steady in how they've built this up. And as far as I can tell from the initial numbers we're seeing, and Riot won't confirm this for another month or so to get all of the data, this World Championship was their most popular to date. People were watching in millions of numbers at a terrible time for Western audiences. And it was more people than we've had in any other World Championship. It was more people in China for sure. Riot has done a very good job of not only treating the West well, but in particular making China very happy, which is where the majority of the player base is, and letting Korea run things with OGN, which Blizzard is not letting Korea do in their scene. So there are a lot of problems that, as someone who loves Heroes of the Storm and watched that scene completely collapse and Blizzard do nothing to help it, from StarCraft 2, watching Blizzard actively kill that game with some of their decisions, I have more faith in Riot from a historical perspective than I do in Blizzard. But, and this is a big but, and I think it speaks to Riley's point here, I think Blizzard is doing something very different from any program they've tried before. And if this works, it will set them apart and give them a longevity that no other esport has had, because it is going to tie people to a regional love of their game, to a team and a much deeper connection. If we're going to make the argument, for instance, that nothing in this LCS team, none of these teams being dropped matters, because ultimately people are going to go to the same studio, they'll watch the same streams, they'll do whatever. You know what totally did matter? When St. Louis lost their football team to Los Angeles. A lot of people had their lives affected by that. A lot of people were very heavily invested because that's my team. And Immortals was my team, and I cared about them just as much as I cared about my Falcons or any of my other teams. But we all kind of agree, there is not a team in League of Legends other than maybe TSM in the West that has that level of connection. And if Overwatch League works, and that is an if, but it can work, the potential is there, they would be adding something different that gives them a different kind of stability than what we've seen in the past. So obviously all of these questions we're going to have to see as time moves on. I I do wonder if maybe, the 76ers are going to talk to a lot of their NA friends and be like, NBA friends and say, hey, by the way, Riot doesn't care about you, just letting you know ahead of time. They don't care. But we'll see. All of that is to be seen. All of that is going to make watching this franchising unfold particularly exciting. We will probably come back to this topic once Riot announces how the financing is going to work and we have a deeper idea of their plan moving forward in the immediate future. But that has been a podcast for now, and if you enjoyed it, you should definitely subscribe both to this channel, the Rough Drafts Podcast, and of course to our SoundCloud or iTunes or wherever else you get podcasts. We're on all of the places you can listen to it, on all of the things that you use to listen to podcasts, and truly appreciate all of your support. We're going to be doing a lot of content over the next few months. I have a lot of big plans for the pod that I plan on announcing very soon and that I think you're all going to be excited for. But of course, you should also be following all of the lovely people that I had on this panel today. Matt, where can the nice people at home find you if they want to talk to you about anything you said today?
Twitter at SuperbianMG.
Awesome. And Riley, if people want to talk to you or they want to watch your stream, where can they find you?
I'm Arbitrarium lol on Twitch and Twitter, and Arbitrarium on YouTube. And if you can't spell it, that's okay. Me too. I'll find you.
Of course. And all of these will be in the description as well. And Xander, any plugs for you on your way out?
Yeah, you can find me at twitch.tv/Orzaidus. You can also find me at Twitter at the same handle, Orzaidus. And I'm always down to talk about League, so hit me up.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. We will be back sometime next week. I believe I'm going to make my announcement pretty soon. So stay tuned, everyone at home. And until next time, goodbye, Internet.